She hadn't said a word all evening. The dojo was alive with chatter, the slap of bare feet on polished wood, the grunts of exertion as students practiced locks and throws. But in the corner, she sat quietly, her gray sweats making her almost invisible among the crisp white uniforms. Nobody knew her name. Nobody cared to ask. And then came the voice, mocking, confident. "All right, sweetheart. Since you're so quiet back there, why don't you come up here and show us how you'd handle a real threat? Or are you just here to watch?" Laughter broke the silence, nervous but eager to follow their teacher's lead. Sensei Rick, tall, broad, his black belt tied proudly around his waist, loved moments like this. He lived for the spotlight, for the adoration, for the chance to prove once again that he was untouchable. But there was something in her stillness that unsettled the retired general sitting on the bench. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. He had seen that stance before, not in dojos or demonstrations, but in the dust-filled rooms of war zones where names of legends were whispered with reverence. She didn't rise immediately, didn't flinch, didn't react at all. Silence. That silence grew heavier with every passing second, filling the room like a fog no one could escape. The laughter faltered. The students shifted uneasily, and Rick, feeding on performance, pushed harder. "Come on," he beckoned, flashing a grin. "Don't be shy, it's just a simple wrist grab defense. I'll even go easy on you." More chuckles, more arrogance. But no one noticed the subtle shift, the way her weight adjusted just slightly, her feet finding balance that looked casual to the untrained eye. To the general, it was unmistakable. It was readiness. She nodded, one small, imperceptible movement, and then she stood. Her steps were quiet, efficient, not a wasted motion. To most, it was just walking. To the general, it was a predator closing distance. Rick smiled wider, playing to his crowd. He reached for her wrist with practiced speed, expecting a flinch, a struggle, a mistake he could use to fuel another lecture. But she gave him nothing. Her hand lay limp in his grip, dead weight, confusing him for a fraction of a second. And in that fraction, everything changed. Pain shot up his arm, white hot and sudden. His hand spasmed, his grip faltering without warning. Before his mind could catch up, she had already moved, sliding into his space, using his own momentum against him. Balance shattered. The floor disappeared. And then impact. He was on his back, air knocked from his lungs, his vision swimming. A forearm pressed against his throat, not crushing, not choking, just absolute control. And finally her eyes met his. Calm, cold, professional, no triumph, no anger, no malice. Only the detached focus of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The room froze. No sound, no laughter, only the hum of fluorescent lights and the pounding of Rick's panicked heart. 2 seconds, that's all it had taken. The general rose slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He approached, his eyes never leaving her, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but heavy with a weight none of the students understood. "Ma'am, permission to see your identification." Confusion rippled through the room. Why ask? Why address her with respect? Why the request, not the command? She gave a short nod, fluidly releasing Rick, and stood. No wasted effort. No dramatic pause, just motion. She reached for a small bag near the wall and retrieved a wallet, handing the general a card without a word. He read it carefully, his expression shifting from respect to awe, and when he looked up, his voice carried authority that demanded silence. "For those of you wondering what just happened," he began, scanning the stunned faces, "you have just witnessed the difference between sport and science, between arrogance and competence." He lifted the card. "Her name is Anna Morgan, Joint Special Operations Command, Task Force 7, Special Activities Division, cross-trained with SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force, 17 combat deployments, classified." The students stared, mouths agape. "You see a woman in sweats," the general continued, his eyes narrowing on Rick. I see an operator who has spent more time in hostile territory than all of you combined have spent in this dojo. You judged her by her silence, by her gender. The enemies of this nation made the same mistake, and they are not here to tell you how that worked out for them." The words hit like a hammer, final, absolute. Rick struggled to his feet, face burning with humiliation, but said nothing. The weight of the moment crushed him more than her forearm ever had. And as Anna stood there, unbothered, unshaken, something deeper rippled through the room. A shift no one could explain, but everyone could feel. The silence was hers now, she owned it. And for the first time in his life, Rick, the man who thrived on noise, on performance, on dominance, understood the true meaning of weakness. But here's the question no one in that room asked. Who was Anna Morgan really? What had she seen in those 17 deployments that carved that calm into her bones? What ghosts had she carried into this quiet dojo on an ordinary afternoon? And why, after all that, was she here, blending into the corner, wearing gray sweats like she wanted to disappear? The answer wasn't in her grip or her stance or even the general's words. It was buried deeper, in memories no one had earned the right to hear. Not yet. Because silence doesn't just hide strength, sometimes it hides scars. Why was she even there? That's what the students whispered when class finally ended, when Sensei Rick retreated into his office with humiliation burning in his veins, and when General Wallace left with the quiet dignity of a man who knew he had just witnessed something sacred. Why had she come? Why now? Why here in their small-town dojo, on a base that had long since quieted from the chaos of war? Anna never answered. She never explained. She simply bowed, collected her bag, and stepped out into the cool night air, leaving silence trailing in her wake. But inside her chest, beneath that steady exterior, something stirred. Because being underestimated was nothing new. It was, in fact, her life story. She remembered the first time she walked into a briefing room in Afghanistan. It had been early morning, the desert air already hot, the faint smell of dust and diesel clinging to every surface. The room was crowded, rows of men in fatigues, voices low, eyes scanning maps, screens filled with satellite images of valleys and compounds. She had slipped in quietly, her uniform crisp, her hair tied back tight, carrying her rifle like it was part of her arm. No one looked at her. Not really. Some glanced, dismissed her. Others smirked, assuming she was attached medical or intel. Someone even muttered babysitter duty. But no one asked, no one cared. Until the colonel cleared his throat and said words she would never forget. "Gentlemen and Morgan, she'll be running point." The silence had been absolute. Eyes widened, mouths twitched, a few chuckles quickly stifled. Running point meant first through the door, first into the unknown, first to test the ground where IEDs might wait, where ambushes lurked, where life and death separated themselves in milliseconds. She remembered the way her heart had pounded, not with fear, but with a familiar ache. The ache of being doubted, the ache of carrying more than her weight because no one believed she could. That night she'd done her job, silent, efficient, professional, and when the smoke cleared, when the team had returned alive, no one laughed anymore. But they didn't apologize either. Respect in her world wasn't given. It was taken, earned, carved out of the silence like stone against a blade. She carried those memories into every quiet room she entered, even this one. The dojo. It wasn't supposed to matter. It wasn't supposed to bring back the weight of all those eyes, the sting of those assumptions. But it did. Every chuckle, every doubt, every dismissive glance. They reminded her of every time she had been told she was too small, too quiet, too fragile. And maybe that was why, when Rick reached for her wrist, she had allowed herself a brief moment, just a fraction of a second, to remember, to let all of it pour into the stillness before she moved. Because every ghost, every doubt, Every deployment had trained her for that one motion, that 2-second lesson. Later, alone in the small apartment the military had assigned her, Anna sat in the dark. The bag from the dojo lay at her feet, still half-zipped. Her sweats clung damp against her skin. She hadn't even bothered to shower. Instead, she stared at the wall, not seeing it, not really. Her mind was somewhere else. In the desert. In the mountains. In the black of night where she had lain still for hours, her sniper scope trained on a compound that pulsed with hostile activity. Her finger had rested lightly on the trigger, steady despite the tremor in her muscles. She had waited, breathing in rhythm with the earth, slowing her pulse until she felt it in her teeth. And then she had taken the shot. Clean, precise, necessary. The team had moved, lives were saved, a mission secured. But no one ever spoke about the weight of silence that came after. The silence of knowing a man would never see another dawn. The silence of carrying that truth in your chest, night after night, deployment after deployment. She blinked and the apartment came back into view. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock. Her hands flexed without meaning to, as if still remembering the trigger's cold curve. She let out a breath, slow, controlled. And then she whispered, almost to herself, "You wanted quiet, here it is." The dojo incident spread quickly, as the general had predicted. Soldiers on the base whispered the story over mess hall tables. Young recruits repeated it with awe. Even seasoned NCOs shook their heads in disbelief. Anna Morgan, a ghost among them. She hated it. Not the respect, not the recognition, but the noise. The attention dragged her back into the light she had spent years avoiding, and the light always came with shadows. She closed her eyes and saw faces, too many. The boy who hadn't been old enough to shave, who had looked at her with trust before stepping off on a patrol that never returned. The teammate who had joked about her silence, who now lived only in a folded flag handed to his wife. The enemy who had dropped his weapon at the last second, whose fate she still carried in dreams. She opened her eyes, the walls felt closer, the air thinner. And for the first time in a long time, Anna Morgan wasn't calm. The next evening, she returned to the dojo. The room went silent when she walked in, the weight of her presence pressing against every corner. Rick stood at the front, his black belt still tied but his eyes lowered. He bowed. Not as an instructor, not as a man proving something, but as a student. The gesture was sincere, humble. And for the first time she nodded. A small nod, but enough. She stepped onto the mat, blending into the line of students as if nothing had happened the night before. No one dared mock her now. No one dared assume. Yet the questions lingered. Who was she beyond the legend? Beyond the card, the rank, the whispered stories of Delta Force and SEAL Team 6? And why, after surviving everything she had, did she choose silence, shadows, and a corner seat in a small-town dojo? The answer was buried deep, too deep for anyone to see. But Anna knew. Because silence wasn't just her weapon. It was her prison. What did silence sound like at war? For Anna, it was never the absence of noise. It was the hum before contact, the pause before the breach, the suspended heartbeat between the order to move and the first crack of gunfire. It was in those moments that she felt most alive and most haunted. The memory came to her uninvited as she sat in the dojo after class, legs folded beneath her on the mat. The others had left. Rick had bowed out quietly, offering no words, only a humbled glance. The lights hummed overhead. The air smelled faintly of sweat and wood polish. And in that stillness, she was back in the mountains. The year was blurred now, one of 17 deployments, indistinguishable in the way war folds time into itself. She remembered the cold, sharp cutting, a wind that chewed at exposed skin. They had been tasked with a high-value capture. Intelligence had pinned a cell leader to a remote compound nestled against jagged cliffs. Too many escape routes, too many unknowns. She was the point. Always the point. She remembered the feel of gravel shifting beneath her boots, the weight of her rifle against her shoulder, the way her breath crystallized in the night air. Behind her, a dozen men followed, their trust silent, unspoken, but heavy. She didn't ask for that trust, she never did, but it was there whether they admitted it or not. And as they approached the compound, silence stretched. Every footstep echoed in her chest, every shadow shifted like a living thing. Her hand rose a signal, stop. The team froze. Ahead a dog barked, a door creaked, figures moved against the flickering light of an oil lamp. Her pulse slowed, controlled. One breath, two, three. She moved. The breach was violent as it always was, shouts, splintering wood, muzzle flashes that burned against the night. Her world narrowed to fragments, a doorway cleared, a figure lunging, the recoil of her weapon, the weight of a body crumpling to the ground. Noise everywhere, chaos, yet inside she was silent. And then a child's cry. She froze. Through the smoke and shadows, a small figure appeared, bare feet, thin frame, eyes wide with terror. She hesitated. Her finger on the trigger, her breath caught. The boy couldn't have been more than 8, maybe younger. He stumbled into the open, and for one suspended second, the entire mission tilted. Her team shouted, someone cursed, someone else moved to grab him. But her eyes locked on his. And in that instant she saw more than fear, she saw herself. Small, silent, overlooked. And she couldn't pull the trigger. They captured the target, secured the compound, extracted without casualties. The mission was a success. At least that's what the report said. But Anna carried the image of the boy back with her. His eyes, his cry, the way her weapon had trembled for just that one moment. It wasn't weakness, she knew that. It was humanity, the thin line that separated operators from machines. But humanity had a cost. In the barracks, the men didn't speak of it. No one asked her what she saw. No one asked why she had frozen, why her breath had hitched. But she knew they noticed. They always noticed. Later, one of them, Ramirez, a seasoned ranger, clapped her shoulder and muttered, "Don't lose that. It's what makes you dangerous." She never forgot his words. Not because they comforted her, but because they terrified her. Now, years later, sitting alone on the dojo mat, she still felt the weight of that moment pressing on her chest. It wasn't the kill shots that haunted her, not the missions where she'd executed with flawless precision. It was the boy she hadn't shot. The second she hesitated. The humanity she couldn't kill. Her phone buzzed. She blinked, pulled from the memory, and glanced at the screen. A text. No name, just a number she hadn't seen in months. "Morgan needs you." Her stomach tightened. She stared at the words, the hum of the dojo lights suddenly louder, sharper, cutting into her ears. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she exhaled, slowly, deliberately. Because silence never lasted forever. It always broke. That night she dreamed. The dreams were never linear, never kind. They came in flashes, the crack of gunfire, the hiss of radio static, the stench of burned rubber, a teammate's laugh cut short, the echo of boots on stone. And always, always the boy's eyes. She woke in darkness, her body drenched in sweat, her chest tight. The clock read 03:47. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands clasped, breathing steady, forcing her pulse to slow. She whispered to herself, the same words she always did. "You were point, you did your job, you kept them alive." But the silence after the words was heavier than the comfort they offered. Because she knew the truth. War didn't end when the mission did. It followed you. Into your bed, into your bones, into the quiet spaces where you thought you were safe. The next day, she returned to the dojo. The students parted for her without being told. Their eyes followed her, not with mockery now, but with awe, with reverence, with something heavier. Rick bowed again, deeper this time, his voice quiet, stripped of arrogance. "Would you train me?" She studied him. His eyes were earnest, not proud, not desperate, just humbled. She gave a short nod. And for the first time in years, she spoke more than a single sentence. "Only if you're ready to be broken." Because she knew, true strength wasn't built on ego, it was built on fracture, on humility, on silence. And Rick, for all his arrogance, had finally been silenced. But the text still burned in her mind. "Morgan needs you." It meant something was coming. And deep down, she knew, the dojo was never meant to be her refuge. It was only a pause. A silence before the next storm. Why did she even look at it again? The message was only 4 words, plain, clinical: "Morgan needs you." No context, no signature, but she didn't need either. In her world, silence spoke volumes. She sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling untouched in her hand. Outside, the bay stirred to life, soldiers in uniform, cars passing the gates, the faint echo of cadence from a formation run. Life moved normally, but for her, the world had shifted. That single message pulled her back into shadows she had tried to leave. Her thumb hovered over the phone, reply or ignore. But she knew better. Ignoring wasn't an option, not for someone like her, not when ghosts came calling. At the dojo that evening, she was distracted. Students noticed the difference. Her movements were sharp, precise, but there was something harder about them, less patient, more final. Rick felt it most. He had spent the last week learning humility under her quiet correction, and though he said little, he studied her closely. When class ended, he lingered. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Anna didn't answer right away. She packed her bag, folded her sweats, tied the zipper carefully. Only when silence had stretched to its edge did she speak. "I don't stay anywhere long." Rick swallowed, uncertain. The room was empty, but he felt the weight of her words. He wanted to ask why. He wanted to ask where she'd go, but something in her tone told him those questions would never be answered. So he bowed, low, respectful. "Then thank you for the lesson." She gave him a small nod. The same nod she had given the general, the same nod she had given every soldier, every skeptic, every soul who had once doubted her. It wasn't goodbye. It was acknowledgement. And then she was gone. 2 nights later, she found herself in a room she thought she'd never return to. It wasn't a dojo, it wasn't a home. It was a briefing room. Dim lights, maps on walls, a projector casting grainy images onto a screen, and the low murmur of voices that stopped the moment she entered. A man stood waiting, civilian clothes, but the cut of his posture betrayed his training. He was older now, hair silvered at the edges, but his eyes hadn't dulled. "On it." She inclined her head. "Sir." "Thank you for coming." She didn't answer, didn't need to. In their world, showing up was answer enough. He gestured to the screen. A compound, remote, mountainous. She recognized the terrain immediately, somewhere she had bled before. The man's voice was even, almost casual, but every word carried weight. "We've got movement. Same valley you worked 6 years ago. Target is different, but the setup feels familiar. Intel suggests a buildup, training camps, weapons flow. We can't confirm without eyes on the ground." Anna's gaze stayed on the image. She said nothing. Finally, the man turned to her. "We need someone who knows that terrain, someone who won't draw attention, someone who can disappear." She exhaled slow, controlled. "You want me to ghost?" He gave a thin smile. "You were always the best at it." That night back in her quarters, she laid out her gear. Not the sweats, not the plain gray clothes that let her blend into the background of a dojo. This was different, heavier, familiar, boots worn from sand and rock, rifle cleaned with the care of ritual, knives balanced in her hands like extensions of her bones. Each piece carried memory, each piece carried weight. As she zipped the pack closed, she paused. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window, calm eyes, steady hands. But inside, the boy's cry still echoed. The silence after the shot still clung to her. Was she ready to carry more? Was she ready to bleed silence into another mission, another valley, another night that would leave her lying awake years later? Her chest rose, fell. And then she killed the question. Because readiness didn't matter. Only duty did. The flight was long, quiet. She sat alone, eyes closed, body still, while the transport plane roared around her. Soldiers nearby shifted nervously, some whispering, some joking, some tapping restless fingers on their gear. Anna didn't move. She didn't need to. Her silence made them uncomfortable, and that was fine. Because silence wasn't for them. It was for her. A shield against the noise, against the doubts, against the faces that came back when she closed her eyes. When the wheels touched down, she opened her eyes, clear, steady, professional. Another country, another mission, another storm. At the forward base, she stepped off the ramp into dust and heat. The smell was familiar, sweat, diesel, sand. A younger soldier approached, offering to carry her pack. She shook her head. The pack stayed with her, always. They walked her to the operations tent. Inside, a small team waited. 4 men, 1 woman. They glanced up as she entered, curiosity flickering across their faces. The leader, a captain barely older than some of her past teammates, straightened. "You must be Morgan." She gave a curt nod. "I've read your file." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "No, you haven't." The room went silent. The captain flushed, then nodded. "Fair enough. What I've been cleared to read, then." Anna set her pack down, scanning the map laid out on the table. The valley stretched across paper, lines and symbols marking ridges and compounds. Her fingers traced a path without thinking, her memory filling in what maps couldn't show, blind corners, narrow passes, the echo of gunfire bouncing through stone. Finally she spoke. "This ridge," she said softly, pointing. "You'll want to avoid it, too exposed. Snipers would eat you alive. Use the riverbed instead. Quieter." The team leaned closer, listening. For the first time since she had stepped into the room, she saw respect. Not awe, not arrogance, respect. She didn't smile, but something in her chest loosened just slightly. That night, lying on a cot in the corner of the barracks, Anna stared at the ceiling. The boy's eyes, the trigger, the silence. They never left her. She turned onto her side, pulling the blanket tighter, willing sleep to come. And as the darkness folded around her, a thought whispered like an old wound. What if this mission broke her silence for good? Why was it always the silence before the first step that weighed the heaviest? The team crouched in the shadow of the valley's ridge, the night air sharp, the moon hidden behind drifting clouds. Radios whispered in clipped phrases. Boots shifted against gravel, and every pair of eyes eventually turned to her. Anna adjusted the strap of her rifle, her breath slowed, her mind cleared. She was point again. Always point. Her hand rose the signal, move. And the line of shadows behind her began to flow forward, one heartbeat at a time. The valley was the same as she remembered, yet different. 6 years had passed, but the stone smelled the same, the dust crunched the same, the wind cut in the same cruel way. She kept her body low, rifle angled, boots careful over loose rock. Every sound mattered. A pebble rolling could mean discovery. A cough could give away lives. She glanced back once. The captain's face was pale in the dark but steady. The others followed, tense but quiet, their trust balancing precariously on her shoulders. Her silence was their shield. Half a mile in, they reached the riverbed. Dry now, its jagged stones carved a path through the valley floor. She dropped into it smoothly, signaling the team to follow. The walls rose high on either side, offering cover but also trapping them if things went wrong. Her pulse slowed steady, one breath, two, three. The team moved like ghosts. But ghosts weren't immune to memory. And as she scanned the ridgeline, her mind flashed the boy's eyes, wide, afraid. The moment her finger had frozen. Her chest tightened. She forced the thought down, burying it beneath layers of training, of control, of silence. Not now. Not here. They reached the compound perimeter just before midnight. It was crude stone walls patched with sheet metal, a gate reinforced with scavenged timber. A few dim lanterns flickered. Figures moved inside, rifles slung, careless in their routines. Anna held up a fist. Stop. The team froze. She motioned two forward, then signaled positions, one covering east, one west. She pressed her back to the wall, eyes narrowing on a gap near the corner. A sentry yawned, leaning against the wall, his weapon loose in his hand. Anna exhaled, slow, precise. Her knife slid free, the blade catching no light. One step, two, three. The sentry never saw her. A hand clamped his mouth. A blade kissed his throat. His body slumped without a sound. She lowered him gently, her expression unchanged, her breath unshaken. She glanced back at the team. Their eyes were wide. She didn't acknowledge it, just signaled forward. Inside the compound, the air was thick with smoke from cooking fires. Voices drifted from a central building. Laughter, the clatter of dishes. Too many. Her chest tightened. She scanned quickly, eyes catching details the others missed. The way weapons leaned against walls, the angle of a lantern casting shadows, the trail of fresh footprints leading toward the larger structure. She pointed, the captain nodded, they would clear it first. The door creaked as she eased it open. The smell hit her instantly, sweat, diesel, unwashed bodies. And then she saw them. 3 men asleep on mats, rifles within arm's reach. Her hand rose again. Wait. She stepped inside, silent as a shadow. Every footfall calculated, every breath measured. She moved to the first mat, her knife hovering. But then she stopped. Her eyes flicked to the second man. His chest rose and fell. His face was slack with sleep. For just a second she saw the boy again, not as a child but grown, still innocent, still unknowing. Her hand trembled. Just slightly. She clenched her jaw, forced it still. The blade lowered, her grip tightened. And then a noise. The man stirred, his eyes fluttered. Anna moved, swift, ruthless, a hand to his mouth, a blade precise, silence restored in a heartbeat. The others never woke. The team entered behind her, finishing the job quickly, but the captain's eyes caught hers. For a fraction of a second, he had seen the hesitation. He didn't speak, not yet, but she knew he had noticed. They all did. Hours later, they exfiltrated through the same riverbed. The compound behind them was cold. The mission was marked complete. But Anna's silence wasn't calm anymore. It was heavy, suffocating. On the ridge, waiting for extraction, the captain finally spoke. You froze. She didn't answer. You've done this before, more times than anyone here, but tonight you froze. Her gaze stayed on the horizon, dark ridges etched against the faint glow of dawn. I didn't freeze, she said softly. Then what was it? She turned her head, eyes narrowing, calm but sharp. It was a second, a choice. Don't confuse humanity with weakness. The captain studied her, his jaw tightened, but then he nodded. And said nothing more. Back at the forward base, the team celebrated, quietly but with relief. Another mission done, another night survived. Anna sat apart, not with them, never with them. Her silence was her company, her thoughts her burden. She replayed the moment again and again. The knife above the man, the flicker of memory, the weight of hesitation. She could still feel the tremor in her hand. And she hated it. Not because it made her weak, but because it reminded her she was human. And humans broke. That night, Ramirez's words echoed in her mind again. Don't lose that. It's what makes you dangerous. She wondered if he had been right, or if humanity was the one thing that would finally undo her. Because silence wasn't strength anymore. It was fracture, and every mission pressed harder against the cracks. Why did the silence feel heavier now? The mission was logged a success. The compound cleared, intel gathered, targets eliminated. On paper, it was clean, efficient. Another box checked on a long list of operations that blurred together. But for Anna, the silence afterward was suffocating. She sat alone outside the barracks, night air brushing her face, stars sharp against the desert sky. She should have felt calm, steady, collected, the way she always trained herself to feel after a mission. Instead, she felt the weight of that pause. That single second her knife had hovered above the man's chest, trembling. A second she hadn't allowed herself before. A second that had almost cost them everything. The next morning she found herself back in the ops tent. The captain stood by the map board, a satellite photo pinned with markers. His voice was clipped, professional, but tight with urgency. Command wants another hit. Same valley, different sector. They're moving equipment now, not just training fighters. We've got a narrow window before it disperses into the mountains. He looked at Anna, his eyes sharp but questioning. You know this ground better than anyone. Thoughts? She studied the image, the lines, the ridges, the faint scars of trails carved by men and animals alike. Her finger traced a narrow canyon. Here, you'll bottleneck them, but it cuts both ways. Once you're in, there's no clean exit. The captain nodded, so we finish it fast. He paused. Can you lead us through? Her eyes met his, calm, steady, but inside she felt the crack widen. She nodded once. They moved out before dusk. The canyon walls rose high, jagged like broken teeth. Shadows lengthened as they advanced, the air cooling, the silence pressing closer. Anna led as always, her steps measured, her eyes scanning every crevice, every angle where danger might wait. Behind her the team followed, weapons ready, breaths controlled. Half a mile in she heard it. Voices faint at first, then closer, echoing off stone. She raised her fist. Stop. The team froze. Figures emerged ahead, 4, maybe 5. Armed but not alert, moving supplies. Their rifles slung casually, their conversation careless. Easy targets. The captain whispered through the radio, take them. Anna's jaw tightened. Her rifle was steady, her crosshairs lined up. But then she saw it. Behind the men near the supply truck, a small figure moved. A child. Thin arms hauling a crate half his size. Feet bare against the rocks. His face hidden by the angle, but the size, the motion, unmistakable. Her chest clenched. The boy's eyes again. Always the boy's eyes. The captain's voice pressed in her ear. Morgan, take the shot. Her finger hovered on the trigger. 1 breath, 2, 3. Her silence screamed inside her skull. And then she lowered the rifle. The captain cursed, pushing forward. Shots cracked. The canyon exploded with noise. The team surged, dropping the armed men in seconds. Chaos, shouts, dust rising. Anna moved fast, scanning for the child. He was gone. Pulled into the shadows, vanished into the rock. Her heart pounded. Not with fear, with memory, with guilt. Because hesitation was one thing, refusal was another. Back at base, the captain stormed into the debrief, his voice low but sharp. You had the shot, you didn't take it. Why? Anna sat calm, her posture straight, her gaze steady. There was a civilian, a child. He was in the line of fire. The captain's jaw clenched. You endangered the team. Her eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed level. I protected the innocent. The silence stretched, thick, heavy. Finally, he exhaled, frustrated. You're a legend, Morgan. Everyone here knows it. But legends don't get to hesitate. You can't let ghosts make your choices for you. Her voice dropped, almost a whisper. They're not ghosts. They're the only thing that keeps me human. That night she didn't sleep. She sat on her cot, cleaning her rifle piece by piece, her hands steady but her thoughts fractured. The boy's face haunted her, not just the one from this mission or the one from years ago, all of them, every child she had seen caught in the storm of war, every innocent swept into shadows they never chose. And for the first time in years, she asked herself the question she had buried deep. What if silence wasn't strength anymore? What if silence was surrender? The next day, the team prepared for another push. Intel pointed to one last convoy moving through the valley, carrying weapons toward the border. Intercepting it meant cutting off a flow that could arm hundreds. It would be decisive, necessary. But Anna's chest felt heavier than her gear as she shouldered her pack. Every step toward the mission felt like a step deeper into fracture. They set the ambush at dawn. The sun crept over the ridge, painting the rocks in gold. The air was thin, biting. The team crouched low, rifles trained, eyes fixed on the road. Engines rumbled in the distance. The convoy appeared, trucks, armed guards, dust trailing behind. The captain signaled, "Wait." The first truck rolled closer. Anna's sights locked. Her finger rested on the trigger. And then she saw it. Again. A child. This time riding in the back of the truck, clinging to the edge, eyes wide with fear. Her chest constricted. Her silence shattered. The captain's order crackled through the radio. "Morgan, fire." Her breath froze. Her finger didn't move. Because this time she couldn't. Not again. Not ever. The ambush erupted without her. Bullets tore through the convoy. Trucks spun. Men shouted, weapons blazing. The child leapt from the truck, stumbling into the dust, vanishing into the chaos. Anna's rifle never fired. Her silence was absolute. And in that silence, something broke. Back at base, the captain didn't yell, didn't curse. He just stared at her, eyes cold, voice flat. "You don't belong here anymore." Anna didn't argue. Didn't defend herself. Didn't speak at all. She simply packed her gear. And left. That night, as the base lights faded behind her, Anna walked into the desert alone. Her boots crunched on stone, her rifle weighed heavy. And for the first time in years, she wondered if silence wasn't her armor. But her punishment. What did coming home even mean anymore? The transport plane touched down at the base just before dawn. Engines thundered, brakes screeched, and soldiers cheered quietly, relief leaking out in tired grins. But Anna sat still, hands folded, eyes unfocused. No one spoke to her, not directly. They gave her space, the way people give space to something they don't understand. Because how do you stand next to someone who has been carved by silence itself? The debrief was short, too short. A man in uniform, clipboard in hand, rattled off words like operational success, intel secured, enemy neutralized. He didn't mention hesitation. He didn't mention the boy. He didn't mention silence. When it was over, he stamped the file and said, "Thank you for your service, Sergeant Morgan." That was it. Just like that, 17 deployments folded into paperwork. A file in a drawer. A ghost boxed and shelved. She returned to the States with nothing but a duffel bag and the weight of a story no one would ever hear. The plane ride was quiet. The cab ride quieter. And when she opened the door to the small apartment the military had once assigned her, It felt less like coming home and more like entering another kind of cage. The fridge hummed, the clock ticked, and the silence pressed against her chest like a hand she couldn't shove away. At the dojo, whispers met her before she even stepped inside. They had heard. Somehow they always did. The story of her return spread like fire through barracks, cafeterias, message boards. Anna Morgan, the operator who walked away. But not the why, never the why. When she entered, Rick bowed deeply. His arrogance was gone, his respect absolute. The students stood straighter, their eyes following her as though waiting for a lesson, a sign, a word. She gave them none. Just a nod, the same nod that had become her language. And she stepped onto the mat, blending into their drills as if she had never left. But inside she was fractured. Her movements were precise, efficient, but her silence wasn't calm anymore. It was jagged, heavy. Every strike, every hold, every motion carried the weight of the canyon, of the boy, of the trigger she hadn't pulled. Rick noticed. He watched her closely, not with doubt anymore, but with concern. After class he approached. His voice was soft, careful. "You're carrying something." She looked at him, not with anger, not with denial, just with the steady eyes of someone who had carried too much for too long. "You don't put down weight like this," she said quietly. "You just learn to move with it." He nodded, though he couldn't possibly understand. And she left. Nights were the hardest. The dreams came back, the convoy, the boy, the silence that felt like betrayal. She would wake at 03:47 again, chest tight, sweat cold against her skin. She would sit at the edge of her bed, hands clasped, whispering the same words. You kept them alive. But the silence after those words grew heavier each time. Because she knew. This time she hadn't. This time she had chosen humanity over orders. And in her world, that was the same as failure. One evening, Rick asked her to stay after class. The dojo was empty, the air still. He placed 2 cups of tea on the mat and sat across from her. "I don't know what you've seen," he began slowly. "I don't know what you've done, but I know this: your silence teaches louder than any words I could ever say." She didn't answer. He continued, "When you're here, my students move differently. They respect differently. They carry themselves differently. You've changed this place, not by force, not by rank, just by being." Her eyes lowered to the tea, steam curling between them. Finally she spoke. "Change isn't always good." Rick shook his head. "Maybe not, but it's real, and real matters more than good." She studied him, the weight of his humility clear. For the first time, she allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile. Not joy, not comfort, just acknowledgement. Then she drank the tea. But the silence followed her home. Every corner of her apartment echoed with it. Every night pressed harder against her chest. Until one evening, she found herself back on base. Not for a mission, not for orders, but for something she couldn't quite name. She sat outside the fence, watching soldiers run drills, hearing the faint cadence of shouted commands. They moved with certainty, with purpose, with noise. She envied them. Because she had purpose once, and now all she had was silence. A voice pulled her back. "Thought I'd find you here." She turned. General Wallace stood nearby, his hands folded behind his back, his eyes steady. He walked closer, his shoes crunching on gravel. "You've been back a week," he said. "Word travels fast. Some say you walked away, some say you froze, some say you saw something the rest of us didn't." He studied her face, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "What do you say?" Anna looked back at the base, at the lights, at the voices echoing in rhythm. Finally she answered, "I say silence isn't strength anymore. It's weight, and I don't know how much longer I can carry it." The general nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time to stop carrying it alone." But that was the problem. Anna Morgan had never known how. Why did endings never feel like endings? Anna sat on the edge of the dojo mat long after the last student had left. The lights hummed faintly overhead. Outside, the world carried on cars passing, voices drifting, the rhythm of a town that knew nothing about 17 deployments, about silence that cut deeper than sound. Her duffel bag lay open beside her, half-packed. She hadn't decided if she was leaving yet. Maybe tomorrow, maybe tonight, maybe never. The truth was, she didn't know where she belonged anymore. She had been forged in shadows, sharpened by silence, trained to move unseen. But here, in this small dojo with students bowing to her without words, she had found something she didn't expect. Not peace, never peace, but reflection, and maybe redemption. The door creaked. She didn't look up. She knew the footsteps. Rick. He approached quietly, respectful now in a way he had never been months ago. He set a folded photo frame on the mat between them. It was the grainy still from the security camera, Anna pinning him to the floor, calm, efficient, mercilessly precise. Beneath it, the plaque he had once hung on the wall. The Morgan principle. The loudest one in the room is the weakest one in the room. "I want you to take it," he said softly. Anna glanced at it, then back at him. "Why?" "Because it's not my story anymore. It's yours. And I think, maybe you need to see what you've already done." She studied him, her expression unreadable. Then she reached forward, lifted the frame, and held it in her hands. The silence stretched. Finally she whispered, "You learned something that day." Rick nodded. "We all did." Later that night, Anna walked the quiet streets alone. The photo frame was tucked into her bag. She passed shop windows glowing warm with lamplight, families gathered at tables, children laughing in yards. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the urge to disappear. She stopped at a bench near the park, sat down, listened to the wind rustling through trees. The silence was still there, heavy, but it wasn't suffocating tonight. It was softer. Her phone buzzed. Another message. This one from a number she didn't recognize. Just 6 words. "We'll always need you, Morgan, always." She stared at it for a long time. Her chest rose, fell. And then she turned the phone over on the bench, screen face down. Because for once, she didn't have to answer. Not tonight. Weeks passed. She kept coming to the dojo, training, teaching without trying to teach. Students watched her, not for words but for the way she moved, the way she carried silence like both weapon and shield. Rick grew humbler, better. The students grew sharper, quieter, more precise. The culture shifted. And Anna became something she had never intended to be. A mentor. Not through speeches, not through rank. Through presence. Through silence. General Wallace visited one evening. He sat on the same bench as before, hands folded, eyes steady. He watched the students train, their movements crisp, their discipline sharper than months ago. When class ended, he walked to Anna. "You've changed this place," he said. She shook her head. "They changed themselves. I just stood still long enough for them to notice." The general studied her for a long moment. "You don't give yourself enough credit." She didn't respond, just gave a faint nod, the same nod that had become her language. That night, alone in her apartment, Anna unpacked her duffel bag. One item at a time. Boots, folded fatigues, a knife she hadn't sharpened in months. And finally, the photo frame. She set it on the shelf, not as a trophy, not as proof, but as a reminder. A reminder that silence didn't always have to be a prison. Sometimes silence was the lesson. She never stopped dreaming. The boy's eyes still came. The canyon, the hesitation, the weight of humanity pressing against the machine of war. But when she woke now, she didn't whisper the old words. "You kept them alive." Instead, she whispered something new. "You kept yourself alive." And that mattered too. Months turned into years. The dojo thrived. Soldiers came and went, carrying stories of the quiet woman who trained with them, who spoke little but taught everything. Anna never sought attention, never accepted praise. She simply moved precise and calm, letting silence do the speaking. Her legend grew anyway, not as a warrior, not as a ghost, but as something rarer. A reminder that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It proves itself, quietly, relentlessly, without noise. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Anna stood outside the dojo, watching the horizon burn gold. The world was still full of noise, arrogance, voices clamoring to be heard. But she understood something now. Silence wasn't absence. Silence was presence. It was humility, discipline, dignity. It was the calm in the storm, the hand that steadied, the force that endured long after words had faded. And sometimes, silence was the loudest truth of all. She closed her eyes, breath deep. The ghosts were still there, they always would be. But tonight, for the first time in years, the silence didn't crush her. It carried her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in that quiet it endures.